So, Alexei, this is your second volume of autobiography, isn't it?
Yes.
And this is the one, this deals with the sort of, well, with you becoming a stand-up, but also with the birth of stand-up as we understand it in the UK, really, which is why we're doing the interview here in the third version of the comedy store. Not the original.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I really, really enjoyed this. I thought it was brilliant. But it's not just a book about the birth of comedy, is it? It's about a culture war in the 20th century as well.
Yeah. Well, it's attempting to do several things, really. I think it's partly just a kind of social history, really, of trying to be an honest social history. Because I think one of the things that annoys me is often you see, like on telly, somebody like what's he called, Dominic Sandbrook,
right?
You know, making documentaries about the 80s when he was 12 or something. Well, why didn't you get? Yeah. I mean, Clive James typified it as he does history. His history is basically stuff his mum's told him. I think, well, why don't you get somebody who's actually there? It's not like you're doing the pharaohs and Napoleon. You know, there's people like me in Napoleonic Wars. There's people like me around, and everything he does is like subtly wrong. So there's partly that is to give an honest account of the sort of the period.
I mean, what I thought when you were writing about the 70s is that, and it's really been brought into focus by what's happening in politics now, is that all the circumstances that allowed a working class man to go to college, muck around for 3 years, work out what they were doing, become on some level a sort of autodidact as well, and have access to information and have the little cracks in society where you could survive while you were figuring out what you wanted to do, and then become a comedian playing to an audience in a town who could afford to live there to watch you. That is all gone.
Yeah, and it was a brief. I think a friend of mine said that, you know, in a sense, the right, the left makes the same mistakes over and over again. The right only makes a mistake once, and that briefly allowing people like me through the doors of the gates of El Dorado, allowing that to happen. We're not doing that again.
Yeah, well, I think the problem is if you're of a certain age, that was your base level, so you sort of think that was the norm, but actually it was an exception, wasn't it?
It was an exceptional period,
exception where, for a bit, everyone felt a bit bad about having blown everyone up in the war, and they went, let's give them some hospitals and schools and colleges and things. And now that's sufficiently long ago, you know.
Yeah, now we can reinstate the status quo. Yeah, it was I mean, I didn't know anything else, and in a sense, you know, I didn't value. I thought this would go on forever. This, you know, full grant, you know, allowed to go. I mean, I would spend 5 years at art school, and then I mean, like I worked in the civil service, and that seemed like a kind of because I was temporary. You had to queue up to get your wages every week, and that the queue for the wages was like all people with long hair, and they're all clearly in bands or you know, doing circuses or something. And that was the sort of the civil service was also a form of art subsidy. You didn't have to do any work. You know, I mean, I was saying there was enough work. There was 4 of us in my office, and enough work for one trained chicken. And you know, so that was a kind of subsidy. And then, I mean, accommodation was cheap. You know, you know, I lived in a council flat, and it was just a wonderful age, and it was also an age of, you know, and that made it an age of genuine experimentation. You know, I mean, I try not to be nostalgic because I think, you know, you had all that experimentation and you know, freedom and subsidies, but coffee was terrible.
Yeah,
so,
I know.
Swings and roundabouts.
Yeah, no, I remember the first time I had a decent coffee. It was in 1985, and I didn't know such things existed.
No.
And it came with a bun which had seeds in it and lettuce. And normally a sandwich was just some meat, wasn't it, on a bit of butter.
Yeah.
And this thing had lettuce and tomato in the and I thought, what is this?
Epiphany.
It was. And so people sort of forget. I mean, jumping around a bit, but you writing about touring and like how difficult it was in the late 70s, early 80s. To find anything to eat or anywhere to stay in Britain that wasn't awful. And I sort of caught the tail end of that in the late 80s, where most of where we'd stay was DSS subsidised, you know, B&Bs and things, and you'd kind of be in that, because there wasn't mid-scale, it wasn't like the Premier Inn or anything.
It didn't matter how much
you
you paid, really. I mean, I was playing big venues and stuff, but still everywhere you stayed was shit. You could spend, didn't matter how much you spent, everywhere was horrible. And on the motorway, I remember there was a chain called Red Hen.
Red Hen, there was.
Then they did like a cafetiere coffee, and so we used to seek out a Red Hen. It was still awful. But But yeah, that thing of touring that was not like, and it was, you know, like I said, Kingsley Amis, like some like bugger the customer, you know, it was like.
So jumping back a bit, right? You came to do art. Your first book describes brilliantly being brought up by a communist family, which again would seem incredible to anyone now that there could have been communists in Britain and that it was fine to be a communist.
Oh, right,
it wasn't, you know, it was okay. It was a point of view. Trade union leaders were allowed to be communists. You know, you could be a Marxist historian and you weren't like going to be lynched by a tabloid.
Yeah.
But so that you came to London doing art school, and you sort of. The first thing where you thought you could do comedy really was being in a Brecht play, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I was a. So I was a
what people have to understand is that none of this existed. There was not until there was a working men's club comedy circuit of the same 100 guys doing the same 500 old gags, but what we understand of the stand-up, there was nothing really like that. You had your folk singer guys doing the bits, Jasper Carrot and whatever, doing the bits in between. But so you had a sense you wanted to be funny, and you weren't in a student review. What were you going to do?
Exactly. Yeah. No, I mean, at first I didn't. I mean, yeah. I mean, I sort of got into acting, performing fairly slowly. But there was this mate of mine called Cliff who was he's been at school with me, a couple of years older. His parents were also in the Communist Party. He came back, he'd been in Paris, he came back to Britain and he started this Brechtian troupe. There was about 10 of us doing songs and poems of Bertolt Brecht. You know, what the stripper thinks of while she's having an abortion or whatever, you know. Surabaya, Johnny, why am I feeling so bad?
Really funny, right? You do that, but I can see all that in your early stand-up.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's exactly like, it sort of felt like, I mean, you watched it as a kid, you thought, why is he like an East European performance artist or something? It sort of, it was very informed by that sensibility, isn't it?
That's, again, that's that thing about, I always think, why not use everything?
Yeah.
I used absolutely everything. I used the Brecht thing, I used aspects of performance art that I'd seen at art school. You know, I used my own experience living in the, you know, working and living in the tower block and all that. Because why not, you know? But
doing that, you write about how you've worked out how to make the same bits funny every night, and you felt like some of the actors didn't.
That was the difference. That's the difference between, I think, in a way, actors and comics. When I was in the Brecht thing, they'd get a laugh one night, and then they'd sort of try and do it different. And all that. I think, well, why have you got to get it? You got it right. Why fuck with it, you know? Yeah. And I think that's quite. I think that I felt very strongly that was very disrespectful to comedy. You know, that you wouldn't. You know,
were you writing that about after that, wanting to put this sort of? Well, it's like a kind of review show, isn't it? The two of you.
Me and Bill,
Yeah, but Bill.
Bill Monks.
Bill Monks. Yeah, and sort of, and so it's called. Never mind the bulk. No,
we were called Threepenny Theatre, which was the Brecht cabaret, and then I think the show was called Never Mind the Bulk.
Yeah, and trying. But again, where did you place it then? I mean, that's another thing of people roughly contemporary. Sort of John Dowie, I know, there wasn't comedy clubs. He sort of had to kind of find places, art centres, arts labs, or benefits, or trade union things.
I always think poor John Dowie, because he just came just a bit too soon.
Yeah.
And me and Cliff, Cliff anyway, went to see him at the Bush in 76, 77. I thought, this is brilliant.
Yeah, no, he was, yeah. And actually, by the time
it all came along, he was so pissed off.
Well, yeah.
That
but also he had an hour. He didn't have like 5 minutes, so he couldn't come and, his rhythm was wrong. I mean, he's one of the great
the unknown comics,
I mean, and also
should be a memorial to him
from an era where it's barely documented. I mean, if you you know, because now people doing their first 5 minutes, someone's camera phones it, it's on YouTube. It's hardly. There's about 4 minutes footage of John Dowie in existence.
And he was one of the early fallen martyrs of comedy. But
the early fallen martyrs. A terrible sort of. He's not dead, you know.
We might as well be. He's not famous. He never had his own TV series. He might as well be dead. But so I just the Brechtian cabaret troupe split up, and then just one Christmas I had this idea. I suddenly thought, there's no comedy out there for people like me. You know, there's political smart about drugs, lifestyle. And so I just set about writing it, and then me and Bill, who was the only other guy left from the comedy troupe, and Cliff, we then set about, performing. And like you say about John Dowie, that we again, there was nowhere to perform. Student unions, little art centres, people's houses.
Yeah.
It was difficult. Sometimes you go to a place like we went to the Tram Shed, which was the home of what would you call those? Hale and Pace.
Yeah.
And they had a big following, and we'd never used mics before, and it just the bloke who ran it had to come on and say, "Hey, now give these lads a chance."
Yeah.
He had to give the audience a talking to, because we were going down so badly.
Yeah. So what? They had a gig there. So they
had a gig there, and they knew they
kind of pre-alternative.
Yeah, they just pre.
Yeah.
Nothing emerges.
Yeah,
it's like every invention is an agglomeration of what came before it, isn't it? And when I sort of, do the whole thing about it was me, I invented everything. There was nothing before me, but that's a self-serving lie.
Well, actually, the book's an interesting mixture. It's 99% modest, with sudden flashes of incredible arrogance. Where, I mean, I love the one chapter where you end it quite justifiably saying, you say, having talked very honestly about your fears when you're doing stand-up, your anxieties, your nervousness about it, the feeling you weren't good enough or whatever, you do end one of the early chapters by saying, I'm not saying that the massive business that stand-up is today with stadiums and tours and all this wouldn't have happened without me, but it wouldn't have happened in the same way, at the same point. And actually, to me, the key to it seems to be that reading this book, although admittedly it's written by you, it seems to me that, without this Alexei Sayle figure. No, what it seems to be is that for better or worse, as all these different people that wanted to do a different sort of thing, in about 78, 79, 80 were coming together, you were one of the people that gave it an ideology.
Yeah.
And its ideology was, let's not do racism, let's not do sexism, let's not do all those tropes. And whether that was politically the right thing to do or not, which is something other people can argue about, it certainly meant that it had ground rules and it had a dogma, and it had a manifesto. And all great art movements, need some sort of manifesto. And the manifesto, you wouldn't have this now if it hadn't had something to start
if
from.
it hadn't had something, and then later on, people.
Yeah.
Betray the revolution.
Yeah.
I'm looking at you, Ben Elton. And the Trotskys, Stalins come along later.
Well, when I first came to the next Comedy Store venue, after it's 10 years after you'd been part of the group that had got it going, it was entering a phase where there was a sort of ironic reaction to that dogma, where people that probably didn't even really feel like that felt an obligation to be slightly homophobic or sexist because it was different
against the previous regime. Yeah, and the book, in a sense, is also, it's not only, it's an account of being that figure, that spearhead, and then I think it also goes on to a point where I'm starting to think, hang on a minute, I'm being left behind. That bit which is absolutely true, where I go and see the young ones on tour in Oxford, and then I have to be taken home with what appears to be very severe flu. And in fact, it's just envy.
Envy.
Yeah.
Just with the physical manifestation
poisonous,
of envy. It's like flu.
Yeah.
Streaming out of you.
Yeah. A weakness in the limbs, shaking, visual confusion.
I got that, actually. I got that once when I gave up for a bit. And I went to see a comic who had always said he was massively influenced by me and said that without me, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And I went to see him and I went, yeah, well, I can see that, and I could see it in his act, which was going to 500 people in a big theatre.
Yeah.
And I was sort of got the shakes of thinking, I need to do this again because I don't mind being forgotten, but I don't want to be forgotten but live on in a half-remembered version of someone else's act. And it's weird. Like, you don't realise you've got an ego. And you don't like to think you have, but then sometimes.
No, when you are kind of comic, you think you're all kind of artistic intent. But there's tremendous. Nobody's a comic who's not propelled by tremendous kind of ego. But I just thought it was an interesting task to give an account, at least. And the next one, if I do another one, we'll carry on with that. It's about being an artist, and it's about being an innovative artist. And one of the things that happens if you're an innovative artist is people take what's innovative about you, strip away all the the shit that you think's important and just fucking say, you know, just
Yeah.
do the commercial.
Yeah.
Take your commercial core.
Yeah.
And how do you react to that? You know, it's a
I really like the bit you talked about how in the early days of the Comedy Store, the other acts would sort of hang around drinking with the audience, and you didn't feel that Alexei Sayle could do that because he needed to intimidate them and for them to dislike him or hate him or be frightened of him. So he couldn't go around saying, "Do you want a pint?" And of course, the knock-on effect of that is you have this very powerful stage thing, but you can't do all the networking stuff. You can't go on. I had a point about 5 years ago. I was being asked to go on chat shows. I thought I can't do that because you sort of spoil the thing then.
Yeah.
And if the more and for
it,
you,
it just made for a fucking boring Saturday night for me. Yeah. It's terrible.
I had to stay backstage. Locked away.
Hide away.
Yeah.
I know, it's awful.
So in a way, the
and now I don't care.
Well, the promotional opportunities and the networking opportunities weren't available to you because you couldn't sort of go and be that. You couldn't have done Alexei Sayle, the stage character, on Wogan, could you? You couldn't have sat there with your hat pulled down,
and I couldn't
shouting.
be me. And at that point, I couldn't be me. Alexei, who's like got no, you know, he's very little. He's got very little connection with that man. Yeah, the shouting, you know, the crazy guy. So I was I was very hampered by, I think, that.
There's a great quote there, though, from Linda, where you said that, you know, a lot of people in their 20s and 30s spend all their time worrying that the best thing was happening somewhere else. But during the first year, 18 months of the Comedy Store and the start of the comic strip, you both knew that you were at exactly the most interesting thing that you would have liked to have been at, which was those nights that gig was starting.
And that's something that, I mean, again, that's why in a way you should write a book about, because that's not something that's given to many people.
No.
You know, because it's a rare thing to be at the Cavern Club. In fact, Linda was at the Cavern Club when the Beatles were playing, or to be at Sun Records.
So it's her then that gets these things going.
She's much more. She's much more prescient than me. She could do stand-up.
Right.
She would have been a much better actor than me. But no, to be that, and that's one of the things I really wanted to try and get across, because it's such a rare thing, is to be in that place, to be, you know, whatever, you know, Sun City, where, you know, Memphis when Elvis was, you know, to be in Paris in the, you know, with Picasso and so on in the 20s, you know, was something I really want to communicate, and that is something that I am endlessly grateful for and remind myself about.
But it is communicated really well. But what's also communicated is the situations that allowed that to happen, which was social housing, squats, those sorts of jobs. Because even when you're on the front of Time Out, being written about as Britain's most exciting new comedian, you've still got a 3-day-a-week job.
Still teaching,
and all
and riding a bicycle around.
Well, in fact, you were doing a lot of the sorts of jobs as well that people would now be unpaid internships, like the freelance illustrating. I like all the stuff about being in 70s London and the sorts of people you met, and there were a lot of laugh out loud bits in the book, which I know is like a mad cliche.
Because that's the other thing I wanted to do, was also to make it funny as well.
Yeah,
you know, not, as well as not, you know, it's a very funny book.
You write a lot about going to cinema in the 70s and how, which I think, but this is good because you talk about how a man of a similar age in the 70s might have been talking about Led Zeppelin or David Bowie or some jazz musicians they like. Your heroes and the people whose careers you seem to be following seem to be hard left revolutionary guerrillas from various Marxist uprisings around the world. Right, so you're in the news. You're in the cinema. One weekend when she was visiting me in London, Linda and I went to the Odeon in Leicester Square to see the newly released Sylvester Stallone movie Rocky. Before the lights went down, I noticed in the audience a few rows behind me a mournful-looking, slightly pop-eyed, balding man with a droopy moustache. I whispered to Linda, "You see that man in the fifth row? I think it's Walid Jumblat, leader of the Druze militia from the Chouf Mountains of the Lebanon." "You're always saying that," she replied. "Yes," I hissed. "But this time I'm certain." The Druze sect were much in the news because they were one of the fractions fighting in the Lebanese civil war, which over the next 10 years would tear the country apart. I paid close attention to the coverage of the conflict on the TV news because I was always hoping to catch a glimpse of one of the young Arab men who used to come to our flat in Finchley, then I'd be able to say, hey, isn't that Ahmed managing the .50 machine gun at the PLO roadblock? Which I thought would make me seem awfully sophisticated to whoever I was talking to. After the film finished, I approached the man with the moustache and said to him, excuse me, are you Walid Jumblat, leader of the Druze militia from the Chouf Mountains of Lebanon? Yes, I am, he said. What did you think of the film then? I asked after a pause. It was all right.
Because a lot of them...
So you saw Rocky with him?
Yeah, well, he's
Well,
like,
that's
yeah,
memory.
leader of the Druze, yeah. Because a lot of them, that particular era of Arab, you know, before the jihadis, they'd been to like Portsmouth Polytechnic.
Yeah, yeah.
I think Wally Jumblat probably studied at like, you
Yeah.
know, he'd done
They'd had a good liberal education.
Yeah, often in Britain though, because of the
yeah.
links with Britain or France.
Yeah.
Or, you know, a lot of them. A lot of the Arab, you know, right here, you know, a lot of the Arabs who came to our house, you know, been to Liverpool University or whatever, and now, like the bloke, it's not in this. One of the blokes who lived with Washington later on became King Hussein's brother-in-law. His sister married King Hussein of Jordan, and he'd done physics at Liverpool University.
Yeah.
You know,
Small world. Yeah, I mean, there's loads of there were loads of bits like that had me laughing on the train while people look at you. I liked all the stuff about. I like the stuff about finding the costume.
yes,
And it hadn't struck me before, because when I first became aware of you, you were already in that look that we associate with the 80s Alexei Sayle of the tight mod suit. That you looked like a two-tone kind of look almost. And then I see early photos, and I think maybe even in that film that's made at the Comedy Store.
I think I'm in the suit, but certainly in the photos which are on the stairs here.
You're in the leather jacket,
and chinos. Yeah.
And right, when I look at that, I think, oh right, who's that guy? Why is he on stage talking? But when you're in that suit, you go, well, he's on stage talking because for some reason he is a comedian, and he's got to fill that time up. But all he knows about is Walid Jumblat and sort of mad, you know. And so when you talk about when you saw that suit,
in the Oxfam shop in Putney.
Yeah.
And it was I mean, again, I think one of the things that the book is, I mean, I think is in a way you tried to do with yours. I think it's important to also provide something of a handbook for other performers, you know, to show how you arrived at your methods, you know, and your look, and it's kind of magical, I think, really, the way, once I found that look, it was always, I mean, you can get quite kind of magical realism about it in a way that you think it was, I was meant to see that suit, and it looked like, I mean, I got a kind of fantasy that it was one of the Four Tops or whatever had left it in a boarding house, and the owner had sold it, and it ended up in the Oxfam shop in Putney High Street. And I mean, first of all, it was just my good suits, and then something happened where I wore it on stage one night, and it just suddenly went really tight and stupid looking, or maybe it had always been like that. And also going bald, which was a horrible experience, but was fortuitous because it meant that I shaved my head, which in an era when people didn't really, apart from Yul Brynner, there was nobody who did that. It just felt magical when it finally that I became that guy, rather than a kind of a prototype of that guy. Yeah. But on the other hand, there's nothing wrong with being you can't be stretching. It's nothing wrong with being the prototype, the early version,
Another thing I thought was interesting about that was that, when Thatcher died, for example, you're wheeled out as the critic of the right, okay, but in so much of the stuff in those routines is also an attack on the left-wing support base, on the voters, on the sorts of people. You brilliantly identify that 70s, 80s emergence of, the sort of polytechnic-educated, lower middle class, working class, who suddenly had consumer goods created for them, lifestyle choices, things from Habitat, watching Channel 4 films, which as a teenager, I thought, God, I hope I can grow up to be like that. It sounds brilliant to be like a Guardian reading 80s left-wing adult, but but they're very much the target of your rage as well. And so I think it's great because that would have been the room, the people in the room. So it wasn't like this thing of going, here are the others.
No.
And it also wasn't the thing people do like, oh, we all do this, we're all like that. It's going, you're like this, and you're all cunts.
yeah, exactly. And they loved it, which is like,
Yeah.
But yeah, my rage was, I always felt much more rage with the left than the right, really,
Well, because you didn't have any expectations of them.
No, of course.
Yeah. So you're let down by them.
Yeah, exactly. They were betrayed constantly by the left. Yeah. I remember doing a benefit in Brockwell Park for the march for, what was it called? The TUC arranged to march some poor bloody unemployed kids endlessly up and down the country. People's March for Jobs, I think.
Yeah.
Well, I remember there was a left-wing photographer called Red Saunders, and he said to me, you should be doing stuff about Thatcher, not against your audience. I thought, well, fuck, I don't want to do that. I don't know Thatcher.
Yeah.
Like you say, she hasn't let me. I mean, she's just being what she never pretended to be nothing that she isn't. Really, So, yeah.
That's tied in with the emergence of that audience, isn't it? Of society allowing that.
And they did. Sometimes I used to be criticised for that the audience that I was doing stuff. I was satirising an audience who loved being satirised. No, there was a strong element. What are you going to do?
I know, yeah.
But also there was always a strong. Do I say it in the book? There was always like a lot of army in my shows and a lot of police and
people who like the violence.
They like exactly,
the rage.
And they knew the police.
Yeah.
I think who used to come and see me. Yeah, they loved the rage, and they also knew that everything was a lie because they saw society. They were part of the problem.
Part of the problem, yeah.
Yeah, but they loved me because of the violence and because I was telling the truth, and they weren't liberal, lefty lecturers.
There's a nicely self-aware thing throughout the book, though, that I think ties in with what you're saying about you're attacking your core audience. But there's a thing where, to quote that famous Groucho Marx phrase that gave the club its name, you wouldn't want to belong to a club that have it as a member, and you identify yourself as part of a generation who, being educated, allowed you to then move into a place where you would never quite belong anyway.
Yeah.
Even with me, like it was 10, 15 years later, no one had been to university in that family, and then when you'd gone to university, they imagined that you would then emerge as an executive or something.
Yeah.
Not someone who, because they'd had a liberal education, then wanted to do something absolutely pointless that would probably not make any money.
Yeah.
It was very bewildering.
Yeah.
And you described this socially, in terms of the thing that you'll move through into a position where you feel you don't belong, and also that you get asked on these benefits like the Secret Policeman's Ball with the famous celebrities, but you don't go on at the end for the mass sing-along.
No.
You sort of stand in the wings doing a little dance on your own.
Yeah, but I hated that. When they all went on and sang I Shall Be Released, I thought, puke. But on the other, I couldn't go home, so I just sort of stand.
That's kind of like, it's like a really great metaphor for the whole thing. Like you've been look at all them in that world of celebrity. Well, you can come in if you like. Well, I'm not going in there.
But on the other hand, I'm not like gonna, I'm just gonna stand about and, not quite. I'm not going home either.
Yeah, but then the good thing about that is you're not the memory of those things of yours then are not compromised in any way. Because you're sort of like this spectral figure, sort of. But this is an amazing bit. This is a sort of, for me, it's like a kind of axis on which the lives of so many people I know have changed. Every week, Linda would buy the satirical magazine Private Eye from a kiosk on Fulham Broadway. One day in April '79, she showed me a tiny advert almost lost amidst the junk in the back pages. It said, comedians wanted for new comedy and improvisation club opening in West One. I felt a rush of excitement. This was what I'd been looking for, a comedy club such as they had in the United States. Admittedly, my knowledge of what a comedy club in the United States was like was patchy, as it was based solely on the Dustin Hoffman film Lenny. Right, but again, even 10 years later, we didn't know what really stand-up was. At exactly that period, Andy did a tour, got a grant off the Arts Council, didn't he, to go to New York to watch stand-up.
Did he?
Yeah, he got a grant because he felt like And the Arts Council went, yeah, because you couldn't look at it on YouTube.
No,
There wasn't
no,
any
no.
films. And you're right, one of the closest records you had was the Lenny Bruce film where he's doing a not great impression of Dustin Hoffman's doing Lenny Bruce. So you
Yeah.
sort of see, oh, that's what a comedy club looked like.
That must be what it looks like.
Didn't
yeah.
really have anything.
No, no, and I was particularly poor. You could, if you made an effort, you could get records. And,
Yeah, yeah.
You know, of like Lenny Bruce or, you know, I didn't do any of that. I just, whatever happened to me, that was all. I didn't seek out, you know, source material or anything. I just saw that Lenny Bruce film and I thought that was enough for me.
That advert, as they do, I mean, it's really the equivalent of Don Ward and Peter Rosengard just throwing a bottle in the sea, isn't it? With a note.
They were,
in it
I
and
mean,
saying,
again, that's where you start thinking about magical realism, because they were, until I turned up, they were in terrible, terrible trouble. You know, there was nobody, I mean, what the first night would have been like without me, I can't imagine. I mean, this place, Don, and his house in the south of France wouldn't have existed without. You know, again, I say something else would have happened. You know, I'm not arrogant.
What you're saying something else would have happened because there was a pressure valve waiting to blow.
Well, speaking as a Marxist,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, it's you know, the social conditions existed for a new kind of comedy. You know, and you see that. You know, it's happened certainly in the English-speaking world, in Australia and in Canada or whatever, without my intervention. But it's not. It's without. It had a particular vibrant character with not just me, but with me and Tony and Keith and all them people. That it probably would have been a more pallid thing without me.
Right. But I mean, the fact that Linda saw the advert as well, your wife, and it's not even you. I mean, it's just like it's an amazing thing. I mean, do you think that you talk about the social conditions being right, and you don't go into a lot of detail about it? You talk really brilliantly about how you write a really funny paragraph about one day you're cycling past Chelsea Art School and you see tonight the Sex Pistols. You think, well, that sounds really good, but then you go to the pub instead and miss their second ever gig. And I like the way you've written yourself out of history. That's like being on the side of the stage, you know.
Well, that's what it was. Yeah.
But was it? I mean, I know I've got some singles of Keith Allen in quite decent bands of that period.
Yeah.
But was it a punk thing?
It was a punk. It took the attitude. The crucial difference, I think, between being a comic, we took a lot of influence from punk, the audience, and the attacking the audience and all that stuff. But the one thing, you can't be a comic and be fucked up. You can't do it.
No.
Or be drunk or on drugs, by and large.
Yeah.
Relatively speaking, that's the crucial difference between being a musician and being a comic. Even if you're taking as your influence punk, there's always a cold intellect.
Yeah, you have
There's somebody sober.
So it takes you a long time to figure it out, but you have to fabricate the levels of madness that you get, and intensity that you get from amphetamines or alcohol. And sometimes people go through those and come out the other side having learnt from them. But I think it's like you can't.
It's a fake. It's what a comic, no matter how punky you see him, he isn't. And there's a bit, I don't know if I do, but there's a bit when in the young ones when Rip Rig and Panic. I think, and one of the musicians goes, we'll rehearse. One of them says, these beers are real. I'm going to drink, and I said, no, continuity.
Yeah.
You know, don't move
it's a
that.
nice moment, that.
It's already been,
So when you came to do the young ones, they basically created a sort of slot for you every week to do something, and that program. If you were a teenager in Britain in the 80s when the young ones came on, it was an amazing thing where you felt like, for the first time, there was something in a piece of light entertainment that had some relationship with people that you knew, your understanding of the world, the things you found ridiculous. It had a adolescent energy level, and yet it was much cleverer than its critics realised, because it was referencing all sorts of smart-ass things that you would only know about if you know, and I mean, it's impossible to underestimate the impact of that, I think.
Yeah, and I knew as soon as I saw it, I think the script for the pilot, I thought this is what I should have been doing all along. That I shouldn't have really, I don't know, OTT made me a national celebrity, I suppose, but I thought if I could just have waited for the young ones to come along, then really I needn't have gone through all that nightmare that I went through with OTT. You know?
Well, how much freedom did did Ben Elton and Lisa Mayer get in writing it and in casting it? Because it always seemed to me, seeing the comic strip films, that Peter Richardson should have been the Mike character.
Yeah, well, but that's a famous. I mean,
Right.
that Peter was such a. Peter and Paul Jackson hated each other, right?
Right.
Not from the start, but pretty early on. Yeah, that part, the Mike role was obviously written for Peter Richardson, and then he had a row with Paul and called him a cunt and stormed off. You know, I actually sort of think that it's better that there's not another. It might have overbalanced if there'd been another comic. If Peter had been,
Right.
I mean, obviously Chris Ryan is a thankless task playing Mike, but I think it's better that he does it, you know, than yet another comic, really.
Yeah.
But yeah, Peter won. I mean, that's why. I mean, Peter's an extraordinary control freak, isn't he? And that's why he did the comic strip, and he was in charge of absolutely everything, you know.
I mean, you write in it about how the energy levels and the violence and the danger in it were achieved basically by people putting themselves in dangerous, violent, unsupervised situations, and then often having to finish the shoot in front of a studio audience with a bleeding head or whatever.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
Kind of, you get that from Rick and Aid's stunts in those ones. There
was no safety gear. There was explosions, and you know.
Oh, yeah, you had an explosion go off in your face, didn't you? No, that was in the film, wasn't it?
That on Gorky Park, which I write about. I had an explosive charge on my head.
Yeah.
That had no backing. Yeah, no, it was. Well, I mean, you also asked about. I mean, you asked about casting Rick and Lisa and Ben. We just cast our mates, by and large.
Yeah.
If you think that.
I know,
you know, everybody's in there, Jim Barclay and, you know, Tony Allen. The amount of negotiation that it took to get Tony in that fucking show.
Right.
I think he actually put it in the thing that he had to turn to the camera and make a kind of statement about it.
Yeah, Tony Allen was extremely principled sort of refusenik, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And still is. And
I think Keith wasn't in it, but yeah. Dawn and Jennifer, to say that, you know, Jim Barclay, Steve Frost, Mark Harden.
Yeah.
You know, they would cast their mates first of all, and then
the regulars from the Comedy Store was the first sort of alternative comedy club, I suppose, wasn't it? And the regulars there were yourself, Tony Allen, Jim Barclay, Andy De La Tour, Pauline Melville.
Yeah, no, Pauline
wasn't there. Was Arnold Brown there?
Arnold was there every week, yeah.
But when the comic strip opens down the road, 18 months later, about 200 yards away, and that is yourself, Rick Mail, Nate Edmondson, French and Saunders.
French and Saunders come slightly later.
Yeah, but it had a higher hit rate for people that became household names.
Yeah.
Why do you think that was? Because it didn't have the political edge, or because they weren't people that were, the stuff was more palatable in some ways, or were they, or had the ground rules been laid so they were able to do more stuff with them?
Because they were better.
Because they were better.
Basically. They were just better.
Right. In the book, you write about when Robin Williams came to the Comedy Store, which at that point would have been going about 6 months, I suppose.
Yeah. I guess, yeah.
You say he got in a cab, and he said to a cab driver, "Take me to a comedy club." And you wonder what the cab driver knew that meant he took him to the Comedy Store, because it could equally have well been the Circus Tavern Purfleet.
Yeah.
He would have ended up on a 1970s mainstream
bill with Jiminy Cricket.
With Jimmy Cricket, yeah. And then he would have. And so again, it's really amazing that it happened, because if he'd arrived in London a year earlier and said, "Take me to a comedy club," there wouldn't have been anywhere anyway.
No, there might have
been.
Again,
interesting. An American would assume there must be.
Yeah.
But there wasn't in the same way.
Must have been the talk of the town.
Yeah. So what was so did you know him as a stand-up then, or did you just know him from like Morecambe Mindy and things like that?
I just knew him from Morecambe Mindy. But
so you didn't know what it was going to be like?
I don't know if although I wasn't surprised. You could see that he was a stand-up. I mean, I liked watching Morecambe Mindy. I mean, again, because it was shown as a kids' show, wasn't it? But you knew it was a much more, that there was a much cleverer mind.
Yeah.
And Also the girl, I mean, Pam Dorber is
Yeah, she was
adorable.
really funny.
Yeah, and then funny as well, you know. Yeah. There's a real chemistry between them. And I just knew that Robin was a comic from watching him on Morecambe Inn. You could see that he would basically be doing stand-up really for minutes on end, really, in a spacesuit.
Well, you know, you need a suit to define the character, you know.
And I think by then I might have read about him or something, I can't remember. But I knew.
So what was it like seeing that sort of American act in Britain in 1979 at that short, close distance, at close range?
It was incredible. It was the first time I saw him. It was extraordinary. Just to, I think I was saying about. I felt like I'd been kicked down the stairs laughing.
It would be difficult for people to have plagiarised your act in that period, wouldn't it, word for word, because it had a particular vocabulary and a particular sensibility. But obviously there was an energy level about it that was unlike anything else we'd seen.
Yeah.
And and in fact, the idea that the alternative comedian was someone who shouted a lot about swearing, that became, you must have done really well, because that became the tabloid stereotype of them, didn't it? You know,
that was a description of me. But I used to preempt that, didn't I? I mean, that was my opening line at the comic strip, was say, I'm an alternative comedian, I'm not funny, I'm non-sexist, I'm non-racist. So if you don't laugh at me, you're a Nazi shitbag.